Welcome to another profile of an impact executive. As you've seen from the ones we've done previously, Handshake believes that the world needs a different kind of leader, a different kind of an executive, one that leads for impact beyond just their core business or organization, but actually looks to impact broader society. And we certainly have one of those here with us today, Maurice Jones, CEO and President of Local Initiative Support Corporation, or better known as LISC. Maurice, thanks so much for joining us. We're really glad that you're with us today.
Well, thanks for letting me be with you. And you're right. I mean, the private sector has really stepped up. Let me tell you sort of the things we're focused on now. We're really focused on helping small business, both nonprofit and for-profits, stay open, stay useful, stay relevant, stay in a position to survive this pandemic and this recession and live to continue to contribute goods and services to the customers and to the communities that they're building. We're also really focused on trying to help our local partners provide the kinds of relief and the kinds of assistance and the kinds of products and services that are really being demanded upon them. What we're seeing, and so that may be technology, that may be cash payments to help people with rent, that may be, honestly, it may be a food pantry as well. And what we're seeing is this tremendous outreach from private sector corporate partners to help us do all of this. Lowe's has invested $60 million in grants that we are in turn using to provide grants to thousands of organizations all across the country, rural and urban, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 25,000. Those businesses are using those kinds of grants. Now, these are grant dollars for small businesses, very unusual. They're using it to pay vendors. They're using it to pay for supplies. They're using it to pay their rent. They're using it to stay open and to stay useful. Lowe's, US Bank, Verizon, those are the kinds of organizations that we're seeing lots and lots of additional help from. Netflix came to us and said, hey, we want to really focus on Black financial institutions, Black-led financial institutions. So they've invested $25 million with us that we're going to use to provide bridge financings to minority depository institutions, HBCUs, and Black-led businesses. So these are partners that are really stepping up and really recognizing the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, a recession, and a racial reckoning, and they are providing resources that we can use to fight all fights. And so we've been really gratified by that.
Could you, if you were to kind of sum up, whether it's advice or just kind of, what you've seen from the quality of leaders in the private sector, how would you sum up, like, here's what it looks like for a company to decide how to best engage with local communities, addressing the three things that you described, right? The healthcare crisis, the racial injustice, and then the ensuing economic fallout that really is kind of woven in and out through both of those things. What do we need to see more of from the private sector? I'm curious.
So we definitely need to see more of the kind of leadership that the CEO of Lowe's, for example, is demonstrating. So this is Marvin Ellison, if you know Marvin. Marvin has decided that he knows that small businesses are at risk of just not surviving this moment. He knows also that small businesses led by Black folks and other people of color are even more at risk. And so Marvin very quickly decided, you know what? I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to provide $60 million of grants, and I'm going to do it swiftly. So we talked to them, and in 30 days, we basically had, so speed is one thing that I would tell you that you need business leaders, believe it or not, to have more of a sense of urgency about. And he demonstrates it. The other piece that I would tell you is he also is being very intentional. He's basically saying, these are the small businesses that we know are most at risk. It's not every small business, right? But we know it's small businesses of 10 or fewer people. We know it's small businesses led by people of color. We know it's small businesses who are not able to access PPP. So intentionality and focus is another piece that I would tell you we need leaders to step up and emulate. And then the other piece is the real insistence on partnership. So we've been meeting daily with members of his team, assessing how we're doing and combining efforts to make sure we perform. And so this wasn't for them, hey, here's money and, let us know how it goes. This was, we're in a partnership, we're going to help to perform here. And so those are the kinds of attributes that we're seeing private sector folks step up with in this moment, and it's making a huge difference.
Oh, I love that sense of urgency and focus. That's really important. You referenced the racial injustice and just the need to get behind Black-owned businesses and enterprises and leaders. As a Black man with, honestly, a tremendous career, I have to say, just looking at like the stuff you've been up to, where you've served our country, whether it be inside of public institutions or now inside one of the largest social organizations on the ground. Could you just talk a little bit about how has this most recent round of obviously the racial injustice, but then the response from local communities, and by the way, across the board, right? Like Black, white, brown, everybody sort of saying enough is enough. Can you tell us about how do you see this as a leader at LISC? And then how has it impacted your leadership at LISC? Like what have you guys done to respond to this as an organization beyond just your local outreach?
I think we are on the precipice of a reawakening in the country to just how structural, how much it is the case that in our DNA are blind spots and racial inequities and discrimination. And what we're seeing is a groundswell of communities, of the private sector, of the philanthropic sector, of the government sector, really, really recommitting to this work of racial justice and closing gaps that are in our wealth and health systems that are based on race and racism. In my lifetime, I actually think this is the most promising moment for a wider coalition of folks committed to working on that. The question for me is, will they commit beyond the summer of 2020?
Great question.
Right? That's the real question. Yep. Because I guarantee you we won't make all discriminatory barriers that are invisible visible just in this summer. And so the real test is, can we keep this coalition, this sense of urgency, this sense of purpose alive for years to come so we can really make progress? Now, for me, within LISC, at least a couple of things are being demanded of me as a leader. One, that we make sure that we are aggressively pursuing the mission that we have, that we need to really lean in on fighting for racial health and wealth equity. Mm-hmm. Two, as a Black leader, my employees want me to make sure that I actually share what my experience has been as a Black leader. They want to make sure that I am being vulnerable and sharing just what journey that I've had. They also want to make sure that we as a company allow the space that our employees need to cry in this moment, to be angry in this moment, to be emotional in this moment, to support one another in this moment. They're asking for the leadership to be much, much more in tune with the things that are much greater than what's going on within the workforce. The forces at work that are part of the human experience, particularly as it relates to race in this journey that we're having. And so it's really a demand on us to up our game when it comes to compassion and caring and trying to produce and cultivate a beloved community, both within our company and outside the company. And they want us to prioritize both.
That's great. You used a word in there that I think is critical to all of this, the word vulnerable. There was actually a great article in the New York Times this Sunday. I'll send it to you after this if you didn't see it.
Okay.
That was about vulnerability. It traced the root of the word back to its Latin origin. And essentially, the word vulnerable means to open yourself up with the certainty that you will be wounded. Not open yourself up to the potential of it, that you know going in, if I do this, if I open up and I share, if I am vulnerable, I will get hurt. It will cause pain. But if we understand vulnerability the appropriate way, and we do so inside of the context that you've described, safe environments, the pain actually is good pain. It's the kind of pain that makes us better. It's the kind of pain that helps us understand who we are, the kind of pain that helps us understand who our neighbor is and what our neighbor's experience has been.
This moment is one of those moments where it really is about us getting better as people.
Yeah.
And so this is a moment of grace in that regard. And our employees want us to lean into that. And so it has been some of the most powerful months that I've experienced leading anything.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I wrote a paper. I studied theology in a former life, and used the word grace. So I'm going to take that cue for a minute here. And I wrote a paper in seminary on the relationship between Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, actually, and both of their sort of political theologies. They really did sort of espouse political theology.
Yep.
And the thesis of the paper was that they would have ended up being very, very good friends, and they would have led a coalition that not only forced the question the way that Malcolm X tended to, but also pointed to the solution that Martin Luther King Jr. tended to. And that's a bit of a simplification, but I couldn't agree more that I think unique friendships and coalitions are going to be needed now more than ever to do what you described. We got to sustain this thing. So I'm curious, as you lead a non-for-profit and you think about leading this organization, you think about sustaining not just the impact of this moment, but creating sustained impact with regard specifically to this racial justice conversation. How do we do that? What's your advice for us as leaders and organizations?
So one is that we have to set up structures that perpetuate the dialogue, right? And so within our company, for example, we're setting up a bunch of affinity groups that are discussing issues of race and class and inclusion. We have to really, really do that intentionally, because this has to be something that becomes a part of who we are. These discussions need to be with us in good times and in not so good times, and they can't just keep cropping up when an issue crops. So So just dialogue and fostering vehicles through which to have open and vulnerable dialogue is one thing. Another thing that we have to do and that we're trying to do is to set up, again, vehicles through which you do the fight for racial justice in communities at a local level, and you can perpetuate it. So I'll give you an example. You know, we have a huge issue with housing, and in particular, a adequate supply of housing for low and moderate income folks in Black and brown communities across the country. Well, what we need to do is to set up structures, vehicles in these localities through which a group of stakeholders can come together and actually engage in producing and preserving affordable housing for people of color. And so it's a matter of, yes, we definitely have to refine the structures that exist, but we have to set up new structures that we can bring stakeholders to and perpetuate it for quite some time. And I mean 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. I'm not talking about 6 months. So if we can do that and do it with intention and do it with a biracial and a bisector or multi-sector coalition participating, we can have staying power in this fight.
Yeah, it just gave me an idea, or you gave me a thought, which kind of led me to an idea. What you're talking about reminded me of what we did as a country for soldiers coming back from World War II, where we essentially gave them bonds that allowed loans that allowed them to buy homes. And it literally led to the creation of the middle class. We did so because the war was so devastating. I wonder if there's some way for us to, you probably are already thinking this way, but like for us to look, there's been a war on race in this country, period. We have to see it that way. We have to understand that there has been a systematic war on persons of color, period. And I don't mean to over politicize it, but it just, when you look at the systems, and I honestly, just in studying, you know, one of my favorite books is a book by Jonathan Kazol, Amazing Grace.
Yep.
All about inner city education. His,
yep.
You know, he's got a series of books that are so important. And you know, when you read that, you can't help but say, no, this is a, it's like two different countries from like where I grew up to like, it's a different world. I mean, I would love to see us almost come up with like a bond coming out of this season that leads to 25, 30 years of a home loan for a generation of persons of color to end up in their own home.
And we know sort of the sort of four corners, if you will, of what it takes to actually help a people, a community, a generation accumulate the kinds of opportunities they need. We know we need to work on home ownership. We know we need to work on business. We know we need to work on savings. We know we need to work on education. We know we need to work on housing. It's not like these things are mysteries to us. So we really just need to say, okay, what are the structures? What are the tools? What are the vehicles that we design or refine so we can fight this fight with intentionality for a generation?
I like that. That's really strong. I love it. Well, Maurice, I don't want to keep it too long. I guess I always ask one closing question. If it's okay, I'll ask it of you. So I'm a big fan of virtues in leadership. Probably because as a younger man, I didn't lead with enough virtue, to be candid, and I didn't have kind of virtues or character that I should have had to be leading in places where I was. And so I went on my own personal journey and took essentially a decade off in a way to kind of do some soul searching, figure out what kind of man do I need to be? What kind of virtues and values do I need to deploy to be the kind of leader that I want to be? I have the list. I'm still working on being a good man, but I got the list at least, right? So I'm just curious, when you think about your career, this moment in time, what inevitably is going to be, you know, I have to say, a lot of people keep talking about, oh, when the vaccine hits, we're just going to go back to normal. There is no going back, right? There's no going back.
There's no going back.
No going back. we are only going forward and we will be forever changed.
Yeah.
What's one virtue of leadership that we're going to need as we go forward? It's good.
So courage is what I would say.
One of my favorite authors, a guy by the name of C.S. Lewis, actually at Oxford Don. You'll resonate with
Merton College.
That's right. There you go. So he defined courage as every virtue at its testing point, i.e., the catalyst for honesty, the catalyst, right, for humility, the catalyst for all of these virtues. To your point, to keep this conversation going, it's going to take all the virtues at play. And I couldn't agree more. Courage is, in fact, essential to unlocking those virtues in our everyday leadership.